Good morning. My name is Rich Slomer. Welcome to the New York State Archives webinar entitled Managing Social Media Records. Today's presenter is Sarah Durling. Sarah is the New York State Archives Regional Advisory Officer for the Archives Western New York region. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we ask that you type any questions you have in the chat box, and we will take them at the end of this presentation. And at this time, I will change Sarah's role to presenter.
Hooray! Thanks, Rich. All right, folks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. As Rich said, my name's Sarah. I'm the Regional Advisory Officer for Western New York, so that means local governments in Western New York can call me anytime they have any records management questions, can't find something in the schedule. I'm kind of their girl for all their records management activities. Today, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is social media records. Social media has been around for a while now, and odds are your government or agency has at least looked at setting up a presence on social media, if not having already set up presence on several social media platforms. It has become a very significant presence for a lot of local governments and state agencies. So to get us where we're going today, we have a roadmap here highlighting the key points we'll go over. I'm hoping to have a fair bit of time at the end, like Rich said, for questions. So, if anything pops up into your head as we're going through, throw it in the chat box. I'll answer them as best I can at the end. So at the heart of it, social media is an internet-based tool that allows its users to generate content and interact with each other. It's always evolving. Social media applications and tools today are not the same ones that we had 10 years ago, actually not even 5 years ago. They weren't nearly as robust. They didn't have nearly as many options for use. They weren't as ubiquitous. And they've even become easier to use in a lot of ways. Anyone can sign up for an account on a social media platform, and with just a few clicks, boom, they're out there into the thick of it. Now, friends, as much as I would like to, I am not going to subject you to a long history of the internet and the development of the various communication tools and communities, but let me tell you, if you were there, it was fun. Just know that the tools of social media and the roots of social media stretch far back beyond the start of Facebook. People are a chatty, gregarious bunch, and we're always looking for ways to communicate with each other. So the internet effectively was born with the creation of ARPANET back in the 60s, which really gave us the technical underpinnings of the internet. And as technology advanced, we came up with new and more developed ways of interacting with each other. So in the 70s, 80s, and I was there in the early 90s, we had bulletin boards. We'd dial into them. It was an application on a server. We'd leave messages for each other on message boards. It was fantastic. In the 90s, once the internet kind of ramped up, particularly around 95, 96, you started seeing us take off with new things like mailing lists and text-based chat rooms and IRC and rudimentary web pages, which I would like to note were extremely high tech at the time on like AngelFire and Geocities and Facebook. Just to start these new communities that we were starting to form. But it was really in the 2000s when broadband access and became more ubiquitous and the technology became a little more robust that you started seeing the development of the social media tools that we're familiar with today. Broadband meant in a lot of ways that you didn't have to spend several hours downloading a song, hoping that somebody did not pick up the phone and disconnect you from the service that you were logged into, probably not quite legally. It meant that, you could attach a song to your MySpace page and reliably know that somebody was going to be able to hear your favorite song of the moment the second they hit your page. When smartphones became ubiquitous, though, guys, that's when we ported everything onto those tools. We put all of our social media on our phones, we put all of our friends in our pockets, and off we went. If you look at the stats today, 8 out of 10 Yeah, 8 out of 10 Americans are on social media, and the average social media user spends about 2.5 hours a day on social media tools. They usually use multiple platforms, so it's not just like the social media person is only on Facebook, or they're only on Twitter, or they're only on TikTok. They're usually on several services at once. It's fairly safe to say that we've embraced these tools with wide open arms. So as a result, it really makes sense that governments and state agencies and all government organizations really are going to want to use social media because it lets them be where the people are with just a low barrier of entry. Need to share some news with your constituents? Hey, post a copy of that press release to Facebook. Want to see what folks are thinking about that policy that you just implemented? Send out a tweet and let the responses roll in. Want to show off something that's, you're particularly proud of, or you think is interesting, or it's just, really cool. You've got Instagram for all of your photographic needs. Social media makes it incredibly easy for governments to reach out and communicate with their constituents, forming relationships that they may not have had access to and becoming an invaluable tool in many regards. But that opportunity is not without some risks. I've got a few of them listed up on the screen. The ease with which we can jump into social media often means that some of the drawbacks are often overlooked. We see that goal of just reaching out to other people. All we have to do is set up an account, make a post, bam. And we don't really think about what that means and what we need to do to set up these accounts properly to protect ourselves. And what that can mean is we are often put in positions where we don't fully have control over what's being posted, what's being responded to, or how it's being managed, which is a problem when it comes to records management. So here's the thing. If your organization is using social media, there's a very high probability that your organization is creating records that need to be managed. And they often get overlooked. And there's often a bunch of reasons for that, right? Sometimes the RMO isn't aware that they could be records. It's a new concept to them. Sometimes the RMO isn't aware that an account exists. We've all seen this happen out in the field. Somebody sets up a Facebook page for their department or in their role as a public government officer, but they don't go through the appropriate channels to do so, or maybe those channels don't exist. And so they're off on their own doing their own thing, and there's no centralized control of the government. The records management officer doesn't know that those pages exist, so they don't know that they need to manage them. It's a challenge. And sometimes it's just a low priority concern. The government doesn't post much on the website, on Facebook, for example. Or the thought is so long as they don't delete anything, they're good because they can always access that information. Whatever the reason, like all records and electronic ones in particular, ignoring these records is only going to be increasing the risks associated with them and make them more challenging to manage down the line. So you really need to make sure that if you are using social media, you are managing the records that you are creating with it. So how do you do that? You have a plan! Like pretty much every record, social media records are easiest to manage before they're created. If you develop plans, policies, procedures for the use and management of social media before the records are created, you have guidelines in place at the start for how they should be handled. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to question it. You can train whoever's going to be hired on how to do it appropriately. It's already set up for you. But I know many of you are sitting there going, Sarah, that ain't going to work for us. That ship has sailed. We have been on the internet and we have been on Facebook since 2012. We are way into social media at this point. And I get that. That's fair. I mean, social media has been around for a while now. The thing is, you still need to have those plans, those policies, those procedures for day-forward social media use. to manage what's already in place, and to help implement whatever comes next, because the technology isn't going to stop. It's going to keep improving. New services are going to come out. You know, who remembers doing it for the Vine and then doing it for the Gram, and now you're doing it for the TikTok? There's always going to be something new. So you need to have those policies and procedures in place so that when the next new thing comes along that you want to participate in, even though you don't need to participate in everything, you have those in place. The thing is, with the records that you already have, you do have to deal with them. So you are going to have to do more research to find out what's in place in your government, you know, who's using it, how is it being used, who's posting, so that you can incorporate those into these plans and procedures that you will be creating. So start by gathering a team. You know, these plans and procedures have potentially far-reaching implications for your organization. So you want to make sure that you have everybody on board that you need to. That means you want to have management on your team. You want to have counsel on your team. You want to have IT especially on your team, because IT is going to know where all the bodies are buried when it comes to managing these records. Obviously, records management needs to be on board. I guess I'm assuming that your records management right off the top. But you also want to think about other units that you might need to include in this plan as well. So say you have a government that is well into using social media at this point, and there's a department in particular that has a very outsized presence, they are very active. You're probably going to want to bring in somebody from that unit to be a representative of what's going on and what they're doing. If you're an organization that's large enough to have a PR wing, you know, you've got a communications unit, you're probably going to want to have somebody in from that unit as well. They may be the person who actually ends up running the whole thing. If you have a board where, you know, your board is particularly active in social media, they post a lot of things through your town or government's, social media sites, you're probably going to want to have them on board as well. These are the folks that are going to be responsible for developing your plans going forward. And the plans, policies, and procedures are going to be one of the best tools that you have to gain control of your social media records. I know that might not seem the most intuitive right this second, but I promise I'm going to explain. So you want to start off with that high-level plan. Why do you want to use social media? What is the purpose for your government? You know, is it just because it's cool, or because there are things you want to get done, you want to do with it? You know, you want to reach out to people, you want to contact folks, you want to share information. What sort of information or messages do you want to share? You know what the purpose of the social media is, not just I want to have it because I want to have it. Set those goals. You know, what do okay, you know why you want to have it. What are your goals? You know, in 1 year, what do you want to have done with your social media? In 3 years, what do you want to have done with your social media? In 5 years, given the rate of technology, you may want to have a 5-year plan. So have goals identifying where you want to be at certain points so that you can make plans to get there. What platforms do you want to use? This can be important. You know, where are the constituent groups that you want to reach? Not every platform reaches the same groups. Not every group uses the same platform the same way. For example, boomers and zoomers do not use Facebook in the same way. So you want to make sure that you are targeting the social media tools that are going to be of the most use to you. I've definitely seen some cool things, particularly at the height of Pinterest, where Pinterest at one point had a very large parenting community on it. And you would see agencies and specific groups targeting Pinterest to reach out to the parenting community to make sure that they had the information that they wanted to share, which I thought was pretty cool. And finally, you know, which offices and staff members are going to need to have access to social media? And that ties into the next thing. What model are you going to use for managing your social media? There are a couple of models that you can use. The first one is a strict centralized control model. In this model, everything is limited to a centralized location, office, set of people. It often limits the number of social media accounts that a government has. So instead of having a Facebook page for each department in a government or agency, it'll have one for that one Facebook page for the entire government or agency. It often restricts who can post. There's like maybe 1 or 2 people who can post within the entire organization. There are strict policies and procedures about what can be posted, how that gets approved, and who is able to respond to posts. And it also has very strict policies on how it's managed. A second model offers a more distributed approach to this. A lot of it's very similar to that centralized plan, because you still have those really well-defined policies and procedures as to what can be posted, who is allowed to post, how does that post get approved. But it allows for multiple units within an organization to manage their own social media. So a really good example of this is a school district, right? You have a school district which has the main offices and then multiple schools within the district. Instead of everything being concentrated out of that main office, so instead of, archives, school district managing all of the social media, all of the schools within the school district will have their own set of social media. So the elementary school will have social media. The middle school will have their own social media set up. The high school will have their own social media set up. But again, like I said, it still has those strict policies and procedures for how that content is managed. The final model is a bit more of a free-for-all. It has no internal controls. It is really more of a organic growth and development model. If you want to set it up, you can use it however you want. On one hand, there are opportunities for really serendipitous things. You've got a unit that you might not necessarily have expected to be a good fit for social media, doing really good work, reaching out to constituents in ways that you hadn't thought, having great interactions with them. But you don't have a lot of control over what's going on. You don't have control over what's being set up. You don't have control over what's being said. You may not have control over the records, which you are going to need to get access to. So there's a lot of trade-offs with that model. Is the serendipity and potential good surprises worth the challenges of managing it? All of these models do have their place, so it's really important to analyze your organization's needs and figure out what's the best one for you and what's the one that you're going to have the resources to best manage. Once you have your plan set up and you decide on the model, you really want to start setting up your policies and procedures. I mean, a lot of these I kind of feel are common sense. Understanding what's appropriate to post, and this can include both the content. What content are we allowed to put on the website, but also what sort of tone you're using when you're interacting with folks. Develop that process for approving posts. I can't just walk into load up the archives Facebook page, start updating it myself. I need to go through a process for approving any posts that I feel should go on that page. You need to decide who's going to post content. This is going to depend on the model as to where those people are going to reside in your organization. You need to decide who's going to moderate your account. This is a big thing with social media that I don't think a lot of people think about. When you have people interacting with your content, you want to be able to make sure that you're responding to any requests that you're getting, that you are going to be able to make sure that it's being used appropriately, that you're moderating the use of it. And that means you need resources dedicated to doing that. It's not one of those things where you just kind of want, oh, well, I'll go check it every 3 weeks because you might have gotten a request 2 weeks ago that was fairly urgent. So you really want to think about that when you're developing your policies and procedures for social media. And you want to determine the frequency of updates. What are you using your social media for, and how does that translate to how frequently you post? Are you just updating whenever you have more important information you want to share with your constituency? Are you trying to be on your users' news feeds once a week, twice a week, every day? You do want to have a couple of consider a couple other policies as well. So do you want your social media to be interactive? Because in some states, you do have that option. You know, you can decide that, yes, I want to be able to talk to everybody who hits my social media page. Or no, I'm going to turn off the comments. I'm just going to post things for informational purposes. I don't want to interact with folks. So you need to decide what you're going to be doing with your social media and adhere to the rules that you are creating. You do want to make sure that you have guidelines for appropriate use, and this is kind of hand in hand with the interactive policy, for both internal and external users. If your staff is interacting with folks on social media, what are the rules for their interaction? How should they behave? If something happens, what channels do they follow to effect change or action? If a user is an external user is interacting with your page, what's the appropriate use for them to use it? Are there rules and guidelines for blocking a user or for restricting their access to your content? And then, of course, you want to determine branding because you want all of your social media across all of your platforms to be well branded so people can identify your content and it's just professional looking, right? Okay, so let's get to the stuff that you really want to see. First things first, yes, social media content can be considered a record and is subject to the same rules and regulations as any of your other organization's records. Not everything on social media is necessarily a record, however, and having social media policies and procedures regarding what can be posted to your social media can help limit what's out there. So that's one of the reasons that you really want to have those strong policies and procedures as to what you're going to be posting on social media. When it comes to your social media, you have to decide what is considered a record. You need to figure out if what's in the post is considered the official copy of the record, because the official copy is what you need to retain for the duration of its lifespan, and whatever the retention schedule says. Keep in mind, you only need to have one copy of a record, that official copy, to apply to the retention schedule. Other copies can be considered duplicates, which can help you determine whether or not the copy on the website or on your social media is actually the official copy or just a copy of a record that you're holding somewhere else, the official copy that you're holding somewhere else. And you need to match an existing records retention item to those social media records that you've identified. And there are a few common types listed on the screen here. We're also going to go over a few in the next screen. So for the first example, you've got a school district. They've posted an announcement on Facebook that they've hired a new superintendent. Hooray! Yay! Super exciting, right? Whether or not that's a record is going to depend on if that information is available anywhere else. This information could potentially be considered a press release, right? Which are permanent records. And if this is the only copy of that information that's been posted, that's been released publicly, this could be the official copy of the press release. If they did a formal press release and this is in their own offices, and then this is a copy of the press release, then this is a copy and it's not a record. The next one has a town board that is posting a recording of its monthly board minutes to social media. Again, this is really going to depend on if this is the only copy of the recording. If they have a copy of a recording on their own servers that they've uploaded to, say, Facebook or YouTube, then they could consider the copy on their own servers the official copy and the copy on social media to be a duplicate. But if the copy on social media is the only copy that exists, then that's the official copy by default. This next one's actually kind of an easy one because the word copy is right in the title. An agency posts a copy of their annual report onto their social media. Because it is a copy, it is a duplicate. And honestly, the original probably should be at the state archives. And then for the last option, you've got a user request on a Facebook page for more information about something a state agency posted. This is potentially an information request and is covered under both the state general schedule for state agencies and the local government schedule. I didn't write down the local government one on the screen. The local government one is covered by LGS 1 item 77. But if you're interacting with folks on your social media and they put an information request in, you have to consider whether or not that's a record, even if it's a fairly innocuous question. When you're trying to figure out if your social media is a record, here are some things to think about. Is the content being posted unique? Can you find it anywhere else? So is this a copy of information, another record that I've got back at home and sitting on my desktop somewhere, or is this the only copy of it that exists? Does it include interactions with your constituency? Did they ask for anything? Did you respond to them? How did you respond to them? Does it document public business being conducted? Was it created or received by a government agency? If you posted it and you're a government agency, it was created by a government agency. And is it evidence of your government, functions, policies, decisions, any of your actions? If you answered yes to any of these things, it could be a record and you need to look at it a little more closely. So here are some things to think about. Most of the time, your social media is hosted on a third-party site. You don't have a lot of control over the back end. You don't have a lot of control over the technology that Facebook is using, that Twitter is using, that YouTube is using. So as a result, you really, really want to take a good hard look at any of the terms of service that you're signing off on, because you want to know what you're getting yourself into and whether or not it's actually acceptable to your government. And this can be things like what sort of security they have in place on their system to protect your data. Where and how do they store your data? Is all of the data that you're putting on these servers stored in the United States? Do they have, storage sites worldwide? These are things that you might want to know about. Who has access to your data on the back end, and who has ownership of your data? You'd like to think it's fairly straightforward on this point, that I posted it, it's my data, but it might not necessarily be that way. So you want to make sure that you are looking at that specifically. You want to look at how easy it is to get your information back out of that system. How can I download that information, those records, if I want to no longer use the service, or the service is going under and I have 30 days to get my data out, and what information is going to come out with it. And then also, what sort of disaster mitigation and restoration policies they have in place? If something happens, your account gets hacked and everything gets deleted. What are their restoration policies for that once you get your account back? These things can impact your ability to respond to FOIL and e-discovery requests, affect your ability to identify records and implement records disposition, and capture and pull out your data. So it's really important that you are aware of what you're signing up for before you sign up for it. When it comes to archiving your social media, because hey, you might want to do this sometimes. How many of you relied heavily on social media to communicate with your constituencies during the pandemic? Maybe you want to look at those records and see if they've got archivable value to them. There are a few different ways you can go about doing this. Some social media applications will offer tools native to the application that will allow you to pull out the data that you've put in there. You can download an archive of the data that they're storing. The quality and availability of these tools, though, friends, they are varied. Some applications don't have them at all. Some of them have them, but they will only pull out a select amount of information, so you don't get like the metadata that you're looking for, or sometimes they pull them out in ways that are not particularly helpful to you, that you can't actually manage and use the data easily. So you want to look and see what's available to you natively. The nice thing about these tools is that if they're part of the site that you're using, they're usually free. You can look into web harvesting software. This is definitely a possibility. These typically will capture what's available on the on the web. It'll capture whatever they can see on their screen for the most part. There are limitations to what they can capture in terms of what they can access. Sometimes the application, the social media application you're using, limits how many pages you can go back, for example, so it only can go back so far. Sometimes they won't be able to capture the metadata that is associated with your social media, which you might need for e-discovery purposes. There is a growing market of backup tools that will help you manage your social media records. These are typically paid services or products and offer a variety of services in terms of being able to search through your archive of social media posts, find things and pull them out for access requests, e-discovery purposes, whatnot. But as of this reading, it's June 2021. It's for the most part they're focused on access. They're not so much focused on records management and records retention in particular. And then, of course, you can always just kick it old school. Print out your social media to paper or save it as a PDF and file it somewhere appropriate, in your filing cabinet or your local area network or your content management systems. This is a easy, low-tech way to do it. It doesn't usually cost anything that you don't already have. And if you're, using a system, using social media in a fairly limited capacity, maybe a good way for you to go about doing that. But it is something that you really have to look at. It doesn't necessarily capture all of the information that you want in terms of, say, again, your metadata. But it is one way you can potentially go about doing that. How often you need to archive or capture your records is really going to depend on a host of factors, really. Are you managing your records individually, or are you taking a big bucket approach to the retention of these records? Are you going to try to go in and pull out everything individually as your, okay, this is communications, this is PR, or are you going to just lump them all together and keep them for the longest retention? How often are you updating your content? How often do you, post to your social media, and in what quantity? What tools are you using to capture the records? What sort of records are you dealing with? There's just so much that can go into it. As a result, the answer is going to be different for everybody, honestly. It's going to depend on what you're using, how you're using it, and what sort of capture tools you're using. As a result, I strongly recommend that you work with IT on this particular aspect of managing those records so that you can understand what tools are available to you to manage that data. All right. I did promise folks a nice long period to pepper me with questions. So it's been, social media is a wild and ever-changing world. It's always going to be something new, something different, something slightly ridiculous in some regards. But it looks like it's going to be here to stay for a while. So putting off managing it is going to just make it more difficult in the long run. The longer you put it off, just like your electronic records, just like your paper records, the more of them they're going to be, the more difficult it's going to be to manage. So you really want to get ahead of this while you can, or not let it get any further ahead of you. Luckily, I happen to know that all of the governments attending today have wonderful, creative, intelligent, and determined staff who can figure out how to do this, because I believe every one of you is fully capable of doing this. So, work together, work with your departments, work with IT, work with us at State Archives, and get your government on the right path with managing your social media records. And if you have questions about any of this as you're doing it, you can always contact us here at the State Archives. Whether you're contacting your local advisory, regional advisory officer, or you're contacting the folks in state agency services. I've got our contact information up on the website, on the screen right now. Rec Management dumps it into our general records management inbox. It will get sent to the right person who you need to talk to. If you're looking for your specific regional person, you can hit the regional advisory officer page and find that person there. We also have on our website a wonderful, advisory for this topic specifically. I'm trying to share my screen. We will see how this works. Behold the beautiful New York State Archives website. If you go to Managing Records, if you go to Publications, and scroll down a bit, because it's pretty far down the page. I believe it is right here, Advisory 10.2, Understanding the Importance of Managing Social Media Records. It covers a lot of the things I just talked to you about. You can download a PDF, share it with your staff. So with that, thank you so much for coming. Rich, do you want to open it up for questions?
Sure, Sarah. We have a few questions thus far. So the first question we have pretty early on from Leroy. Why would we need to manage our social media records when these records exist elsewhere?
Well, that's the thing. You have to figure out whether or not that, whether or not they exist elsewhere, because sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. If you're just replicating something that you have, at your government already, like that press release, then the social media record itself may not be a record. However, once you start getting into that user interaction, that's really where a lot of the sticky stuff comes in. If you've got constituents asking for assistance and you're providing that assistance through your social media, then you really have to consider whether or not those records need to be managed and preserved.
Okay. Also, I had a general question earlier. Maybe you could talk about why managing records is mandated by New York State. The question was, is archiving records mandated by New York State or recommended?
Oh, no, it's required. There's a couple of New York State laws and regulations. Let me share my screen again. We'll go back out to the website and take a look at that. All right, we're back out on the website. Huzzah! So there are a number of laws and regs that relate to managing records. Your government is required to utilize the retention schedules that we put out to manage those records. And if you don't have a retention schedule adopted or one doesn't exist for those records, you cannot destroy them. Depending on the type of government you are, we do have it broken out by local governments and state agencies. Local governments in particular, you are going to want to make sure that you look at the local government records law and make sure that you're in compliance with that. State agencies, there's a whole bunch of laws here as well that are of interest to you. Arts and cultural affairs is really your big one.
And Sarah, what about non-government organizations and historical societies and things like that?
Okay, so for you guys, we don't have a lot of authority over you. You're kind of doing your own thing. We do have some tools available to you. We have particularly if you're a historical association, the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services program that can help you out with understanding how long you need to keep things. Although if you're a historical organization, for the most part, you're looking at records that you're going to be keeping permanently. And if you're talking about more operational stuff, which I guess your social media could be considered, you could probably use our schedules as a good base start for you. You're not formally required to use them, but we've done all the research, at least for what a government agency would be required to have. So it wouldn't be a bad starting point.
Okay, Sarah, we have a question here from Jeffrey. Most correspondence is not saved long-term except by individuals, or is saved too long. Is the 6-year retention rule for everything, or shorter periods, or are shorter periods more efficient?
It depends on the correspondence, because there actually is some correspondence that's going to have very long-term retention periods associated with it, depending on the project that it's associated with, say it's capital construction, or if it's part of basically your executive staff. So it's going to depend on what you're doing with it and how you're managing it. And when you're talking correspondence, are you talking about like the DMs that come in for social media, or are you talking about paper correspondence, or are you talking email? Because your strategies for managing email is probably going to, and I would assume DMs to a certain extent, is going to be somewhat different than for your strategies for managing paper records. This is probably a bigger topic that we are happy to talk to you about one-on-one.
Okay, don't see any other questions coming up right away.
I hope I didn't throw too much information at people. This is actually a topic I'm like super enthusiastic about because I consider myself a creature of the internet. And I have been online since I was about 13. So I'm really interested in the development of and use of social media and making sure that we manage it appropriately, because I think it's going to be very interesting over the long term to see what that says about us as a community as a whole.
And I just wanted to add to folks out there that if you were watching this webinar in a group, if there was more than one person, if you could let us know, just by typing the number in the chat box, I would say if there were 2, 3, or 27 people in a room, that helps us kind of keep track of what our viewership is like. And again, the session is being recorded, so it will be made available on our YouTube channel. Hopefully before the end of the week. And we got another question that just came up here. So a few questions.
Yay!
Okay, so Jean asks, for a town, if a press release is posted to Facebook, is the retention 0 after it is no longer needed?
Yeah, so if that's not the official copy, if you've got a press release, the official copy held elsewhere, the copy on social media is not going to be considered the official copy. It's a duplicate, and you can destroy it after no longer needed. There is a specific retention item for it, but I cannot remember what it is off the top of my head. But you want to think about also, again, this is where social media gets sticky. You've posted that press release to your social media. Has anybody commented under that post, and is that, do you need to save that right? And are any of the comments, do those constitute a record and constitute? There we go. And do you need to retain the entire post as context?
Okay, and a question here from Jill. Is there a plan to create an RDA number for social media?
Not specifically at this time. A lot of social media can be identified by specific retention items specific to what that topic is. So the constituency, that's item 77. Your press releases have their own number. It depends on the content, not the overall media.
Okay. Don't see any other questions coming up, but perhaps we've got a little bit of a delay over the airwaves. And I just wanted to let everyone know that I did post in the links to, as Sarah mentioned earlier, contacting, if you're a New York State local government, contacting your appropriate regional advisory officer for questions or assistance, as well as if you are a state with a state agency, how to contact the New York State Archives scheduling and state agency services staff for questions you may have. And as Sarah mentioned as well, you can always email us, or you can just Google us on the internet and go to the New York State Archives website, and there's a contact us link at the bottom of the page, and we will be happy to answer your questions or provide you with any assistance. We have a question from Howard. What is an RDA number?
Depends on what kind of government you are. Well, an RDA number is a Records Disposition Authority and really only affects state agencies, or at least in the context that we're using it here. State agencies have a general schedule, much like the local governments have a general schedule, but because the state agencies have very specific functions, they also have a set of schedules that are written specifically to them. So we often refer to those as RDAs.
Okay, and a question from Georgianne. I have Facebook as town historian. I often receive information from participants to add to my information. Am I required to keep those additions?
Potentially. I would say it's going to depend on the context of the information, what information's there, and what makes it into your collections. Keep in mind a lot of the more correspondence-oriented retention is still fairly short. I mean, most of the requests for assistance using the retention schedule are 6 years or so after the after a response is made and the request is closed out. So depending on how you're managing your records, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a super long period to retain those records. It's not like a 20-year record or a permanent record. But it's going to depend on what's in those files, what's in that information they're providing you, I think, Ali.
And a question from Mary. Is there an example of a social media policy available?
I am sure we could dig one up for you. I know that there's a bunch of governments that are working on them right now. So send, the rec management email address or your specific advisor, if you know who they are, an email, and we will find one for you.
Okay, let's see if there's any. Looks like don't see any additional questions.
I see a lot of familiar names. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you, so to speak.
Well, I don't see any additional questions. We do have a few minutes left, but perhaps we can use this time, I suppose, for folks to, if they do have questions later on, they can always email us. Any final thoughts, Sarah, before we wrap up?
Social media is awesome, but it is a responsibility, and you do need to make sure that you're addressing it just like you address any of your other records. We're happy to help you as best we can. It is a technology, social media is an electronic record, it's a technology, so it's always going to be changing, it's always going to be updating, so you really do need to keep on top of it. It's not something you can kind of set and forget, like paper, you put it in a box, you put it in a dark room, and it's still good 70 years later, provided nothing happens to that dark room. So it's like most of your records, you really do have to start thinking about it. Again, give me a holler, I'm happy to help you in any way that I can.
Great. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for your participation. And again, the recording of this video should be available by the end of the week. You can go to our website, look under training, our web workshops, and there's recordings, or you can go to our Facebook page, New York State Archives Facebook, or I'm sorry, New York State Archives social YouTube page, and you can view our recordings there.
Yes, use our social media. Make us manage records.
All right, thank you, everybody.
All right, thanks, folks.